Welcome back to Expert Instruction, the Teach by Design podcast, where we dive deeper into the research surrounding student behavior by talking with the people implementing these practices where they work and with the students they support. I'm Megan Cave.
I'm Danielle Triplett.
Danielle, we are back again. You know, these last couple of months, we've really pushed forward to try and talk openly about some of these words that we've heard in the news, in social media, all over our algorithms that are kind of triggering a response from people. And so today we're talking about inclusion.
Yeah, we're diving right in.
Yeah. And I don't know how you felt, but when we decided that this was our topic for April, I got nervous about it. It's not a topic that I know all that much about. I wasn't sure how to talk about it, what words are used. I didn't know. So I got a little bit nervous about that.
Yeah, me too.
And then we remembered our friend Sheldon, who's our guest today, Mr. Dr. Sheldon Loman, from Portland State University.
Yep.
He approached us last year at the Northwest PBIS conference.
I remember.
And he told us, like, hey, this is a topic y'all should be talking about.
Right.
And if you do, ask me to come on your podcast.
Count me in. I want to do it.
So guess what?
We did it.
I know. Be careful when you talk to us because we will.
We
invite
remember.
You.
We write it down, and even a year later, we're like, "Hey, Sheldon, remember us?" But it worked out great. Actually, it's fun when we can talk to someone we know, and who has such depth and knowledge
and a real passion for the topic. Right,
truly cares about these kids.
In our conversation today, Danielle and I noted that there were certain words that came up quite a bit.
Big themes. Yes. Intentional was one. You'll hear that if you listen to the whole podcast following.
Yeah.
That word comes up almost after every question.
The time. And it really highlights that another idea that Sheldon told us about, which is that inclusion is really an action word. It's something that we have to do continuously and intentionally.
Exactly.
And the other thing that really resonated for me was that when we're talking about school-wide systems, data, practices, we cannot exclude people from those supports. There's really good work that's happening in your school, in all schools, and all kids deserve to have access to that. So he was there was really just this idea that all means all, right?
Yes. I wrote down a note. I'm looking at it in front of us here, Megan. But one of the things he said that really stuck with me was every student is a general education student first.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
As well as staff too. It's not like, oh, that's the special ed teacher or, oh, that's the resource room teacher. Like they're all our teachers. Yeah. They're all part of our community.
Yeah. And so we can all learn from each other too. Yeah. Right? Yeah. So he really encouraged us to start with the adults and include each other in the work that we're doing all together and to extend that effort down to our students. That green part of the triangle goes all the way to the top.
It sure does. Yep. It is inclusive.
Yes. So Sheldon's going to tell us all about the ways that we can just expand our vision for what school-wide supports actually mean and how students can access those.
Yes, it was such a rich conversation. You're going to love it. Listen in.
Well, hi, Sheldon. It's good to see you, friend. Thanks for being here.
Nice to see you too.
Yeah,
we're glad to have you join us today.
Yep.
Thanks for having me.
We knew we were going to be talking about this topic, this word inclusion, and you were at the front of our minds about it. We were like, who should come and hang out is Sheldon Loman.
That's right.
So thanks so much for being here.
Totally. We
just wanted to talk first. Let's start out by helping folks, kind of centering everyone on our definition of inclusion here. So how is it that you define it? How do you define it? What are some of the resources that have led you to that definition?
I'm glad that you asked because I am passionate about the topic. And I think of it as like an active, like as a verb, an active word and like a process. And words that kind of, what's the word here? They, that tend to resonate with me is intentional and continuous. It's not really ending, but it's like an intentional and continuous focus to make sure that, students are, and two other key words here, that students are valued and contributing to our school communities. And of course, the idea of having them actively participating So not just being present at the school, but being active members and valued members and participating and learning alongside their same age peers, using supports within their school environment. So very long-winded definition there on inclusion, but that's in a.
I like how active it is, though. I like the idea that we would be, that there's something for us to do continuously, right? That we're intentional and we're doing it all the time. And there's something for students to do, both students with disabilities and without, that they, that everyone would feel this sense of value, of contribution, that they are an active member of our school-wide community. And I think when we were talking earlier, the three of us, this idea that all really does mean all, that that everybody in the school deserves to have access to the same school-wide foundational systems, data, supports, all of that, practices, and that no one should feel othered in that.
I can't help but notice a theme between what Sheldon just said and our last two guests, both Nicole and Mary, and the idea of doing things with our school community together, rather than to them. And I think, no matter what population of students we're talking about, or if it's parent groups, teachers, like bringing everyone together, inclusion is really all about that. So thanks for helping us remember that and emphasize that, Sheldon. I love that language that you chose.
Yeah, no problem.
Go ahead. Did you have other things?
Well, I have a lot of things.
I know.
On inclusion.
I know.
I think, a mantra that I always, every student is a general education student first.
Yes.
Right. And you probably heard that somewhere many times, but I think really that's when we're thinking about inclusion or the idea of not having to have inclusion. It would be because we think of every student as a general education student first. And, that's brings me to the work of MTSS and the triangle and the idea that all students should access those tier 1 supports. And that's where, my passion for the work is really how do we make tier 1 the way it was designed to really be accessible for students, for all students, but especially regardless of their disability, their language, their culture. So
perfect.
Love that.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. I think did you want to take the thing that also comes up for me right now, in particular within the context that we are in the United States, the word inclusion gets thrown around like a few other words lately as a negative and something that we shouldn't be doing. And so I think there are some feelings that get wrapped up in the word inclusion. And so we wanted to try and address those or just talk to you about those. So what are some of the barriers that you see at schools when it comes to embracing this idea of including all students in the school-wide supports that we offer?
Yeah, well, it's actually a question that we asked and did some research on a number of years. Dr. Virginia Walker did a national survey with us, and we really wanted to see what are the barriers to including students with disabilities, and specifically around school-wide positive behavior supports. And some of the results were kind of sad. And the idea of that the characteristics of the students, so their actual disabilities were barriers. That the idea that that because of their disabilities, they didn't staff did not feel like they could access the PBI, the good stuff, the PBIS supports that the school was doing.
I see.
So those are definitely two pieces, as well as common things that you see of lack of resources. We know lack of administrative support, and administrative support is so important. So when that's not existing, that's an issue. And then the other big piece of staff not feeling like they have the knowledge and the training in order to support all students, and especially students with disabilities. So those were kind of the big barriers that came from that work.
Yeah, those are pretty common barriers, right? Like time, resources,
the knowledge or skill set to do the work.
Yeah, for sure. I'm curious though, if you can tell us a little bit more about from that research, when you say that the students' disabilities themselves made teachers concerned that was a challenge, that they wouldn't be able to access the supports that are offered school-wide. Can you say more about what that means?
Yeah, well, I mean, through the survey, there were a lot of interesting responses, over 200 responses. Okay. And I think the resounding theme was just a very negative staff perception and the idea of the lack of high expectations. And so the comments that were shared were, and I even get that in my work, of the idea that those are tier 3 kids. And so really moving past that of, well, tier 1 is built for everybody, and how do we make it accessible and effective for all students? And so,
and then you start to move into those other barriers where the teachers are like, okay, well, fine, but I don't know how to do that. I don't have the time or the resources available to me to make that happen. That makes sense to me. What are the things that you have seen in your work? What have you done to help schools reduce those barriers?
Well,
is it education? Is it just teaching them like what it means?
I think there's a piece you have to build it. I mean, I think that's where, and you have to, I kind of have the come and see, go and tell model of the idea of, you're not going to believe it until you actually see it. Okay. And so let me show you how it works, and then go and do it. Right. And you have to be convinced of it. And it just makes me think of just kind of a study that we did where, we were working with 3 different schools, and they each identified a student with extensive support needs, so intellectual disabilities. And it's now painting the picture of, it's March. And so the students have been unsuccessful and experiencing challenging behaviors all year long. And so working with these 3 teachers, the idea of what they wanted to do was, let's just teach them the expectations. Let's teach them what they should be doing in the cafeteria and in the common areas and at the bus areas where they're experiencing a lot of these challenging issues. And luckily for this school, they were already implementing schoolwide PBIS. And so the teacher said, why don't we just take the expectations? I think theirs was safe, respectful, and responsible. And, they went to look at what that looked like, and it was basically the words written. And so they said, could we do more? And so they specifically defined what that meant in those areas, which commonly you'll see what's called the matrix, right? Yes. There. Yep. But then they went a step further, and they added some visual supports and kind of task analysis supports to how these students should engage in those expected behaviors. And then they also did what's called a social narrative or social story to teach these students those expectations. And then spent just 2 days, by the way, walking them through, looking at those posters that had the visual supports and practicing those skills using the social narrative. And then after those 2 days, they collected data on how those students performed. And we were the data were good enough to be published, and it showed that they substantially improved. Gotcha. Now, the sad part of the story is, we did that in March.
Yeah. Right.
Imagine. What if we did that when everybody else was learning the expectations in September, right? Or August? Yes. And why didn't we why didn't we do that in the beginning when we were designing those areas? And so all students could benefit from those supports. And so
that was something that was something that we even talked about with you a couple of days ago, where some of the things that you might do to help students, like these visual components, could be beneficial to other students in your general education population. So you were just sharing that your daughter is a visual learner.
Absolutely. Like, who's not going to benefit from not just hearing it, but let's see a picture. Let's have it demonstrated. Like, let's give kids multiple ways to access that. Like, that's good for everybody. The other thing that I can't help but hear Rob Horner's voice in my head when you're telling us this, Sheldon. You'd be very proud because you're like, what's the easiest solution, actually, right? Like, this isn't like, let's go get this curriculum or make this investment in all these resources. Let's just use what we have and do it better, right? Like, let's just make this more accessible to these kiddos.
But that wasn't the response that we received. The response that we received is, why didn't you do an FBA on these kids?
Yeah, right.
And the idea of, would we use that much resources if we actually could just use good instruction? Right. You've already built a good thing, PBIS. Can we make it accessible and nip the idea of having to do a tier 3 intensive intervention for a student, right?
When we talk about tier 1, there are data systems and practices associated with it. So what are some of those elements that we can really leverage, or what are the ones that are kind of the easiest to start with that would help us to make our implementation more inclusive?
Yeah. Well, like you, I love those circles. And so I think starting with the systems, we'll think of like teaming. And the idea of making sure that your tier 1 team is inclusive. And so are the right folks at the table? Are those folks that represent supporting students with disabilities, your multilingual learners, are they at the table and really guiding the implementation of the universal supports? I think around other things around systems, again, very similar to what we see with PBIS, is strong administrative support. But an administrator that truly believes that every student is a general education student, and that strong administrative support for building and promoting the idea of, we need to do this, and also we need to use the right practices. It's not just enough to say we do inclusion, but we actually have to practice it, and that takes a lot of work.
I like that you're starting too with the adults in this situation, right? That we've talked a lot about what are the things that we actually have control over. And it's us. We don't have any power and control over kids. And so we have a lot of control over ourselves. And if we start by including adults in our school-wide team, I think we get ourselves a lot farther along. And I think what you were sharing is like, ask a special educator to join your school-wide leadership team, because then you're not having to spend, Danielle and I, if we were, let's say we teach second grade and we're just talking about all of the things that we need to do for our school-wide implementation. And then we have to think, it may not occur to us to put on a different hat or look at things from a different lens, because the majority of the students that we work with every day would be able to interact with whatever it is that we're coming up with. But if we ask a special educator to come and join us on the team, we could come up with this poster with our school-wide expectations on it. And then he could say, well, I've got 3 kids who wouldn't be able to see that sign. So what are the ways that we could adapt that so that the students that I support every day could also engage with our school-wide expectations, right?
Perfect. Yeah. No, that's kind of that piece of, if we want to include the students, we have to include the adults.
Yes.
We have to bring them together. Yes. And the idea of, and a lot of times we think of special educators being at the table, but vice versa, as making sure that general education folks are learning what we're doing in special education. And the idea of, you could use visuals, you could use different supports there. And so really moving away from these, I think we talked about it the other day, is moving away from, separate professional development to then it's a professional development, and I'm learning about the core reading program, and general educators are learning about, how do we provide, science of reading or some extensive supports for students with more extensive support needs.
That's right. Right. We even talked about this idea of co-teaching. Is that what it's called? Yes, you all know. I do. You guys, little fact here, I've never taught in a classroom, but my friend Danielle has, and Sheldon has. And I'm, so talk a little bit about your experience with that.
Right. Well, it's funny because Sheldon, I think we started around the same time. I started my teaching career 20 years ago, 2005. And I was at a school in East Multnomah County, and I taught general ed language arts, but I had a colleague who was a special ed teacher, and there was one period a day that she came and co-taught with me. And she also actually at the time was our PBIS team lead. So when you were talking about it being like starting as a special ed initiative. I remember, because I was on the team, I was like, I love this. I'm here for it. But I remember thinking in my head as with that general ed hat on, like, why is this a special ed thing? Like, this is for everybody. Like, everybody needs this. And so it was kind of making that transition from being in the special ed world to being like, nope, this is for everybody.
What did you learn in those times? What was helpful about having her in your classroom?
It was helpful for her rather than me, like, say, maybe let's say with your posters example, like I already have it made. Let's jilt it together before I even do it. Like, here's my objective. I want kids to learn about, writing a persuasive essay. Here's the assignment. Okay, so what might that look like before I get even too far in developing it? Where, what needs might some kiddos have that we can build in as we're creating the lesson? And those things definitely helped lots of kiddos, right?
And then how does that translate then for the special educator to come in and to co-teach in those classrooms?
Yeah, well, I think that's where, talk about co-teaching is kind of like a marriage or a relationship. And so really trying to see how the style of the teacher and how they work. And so it'll look different across, but I think the kind of the unifying theme is, now called universal design for learning. And really the idea of how do I enhance your instruction? You're not doing anything wrong, Danielle, but now how can we make it better and broader? And how can we, for a student who may not be able to see or be a visual learner, how could they access this great visual that you have, and vice versa? If you're only talking, maybe we could add some visuals to that and really enhance your instruction. And so I think really approaching it with that, as well as helping bring that lens of thinking about the learner's specific needs. So if it was a language need or a sensory need, and then how do we incorporate that in such a way that it's not stigmatizing, that it's very continuous with what's happening, and the idea that other students could benefit from this. It's not just, in fact, a lot of collaborative lessons that we did, teachers would ask, hey, can we use this visual again?
I want to use it in all my periods. I don't want just fifth period. This is great. That's how I was. Totally.
So exactly.
Totally. You're right though, Sheldon, in that the relationship between those adults really matters. Like this co-teacher and I were friends, like outside of school, we got each other. And I think that, it goes to, again, I know PBIS, it's all about relationships at the heart of it too. So building those relationships, making sure that's something that, the two adults can work well together, can make or break that. Yeah.
It's big. I mean, public relations, right? I view myself as kind of like, the public relations guy for the students. And I had to, one, deliver on what I said I was going to do. And also when things didn't quite work out, that we were going to not quit and revisit it and keep on working. That's where that intentional and continuous piece for me around inclusion is, right?
For sure. So we've got teams being like including more adults on the team, which is, also a theme.
We're always like, bring some more chairs to the table. We'll make room.
Mary was talking about a team of 90 that she was dealing with. Well, it was like
that was like at the district level.
A community family situation, but it was like a big team, right? Like just pull up a seat,
make it work.
So bigger teams, and professional development, including all teachers in all types of professional development. What else you got around the practices, the data?
Well, I think before getting to the practices, I think there's structures that need to be in place. I think that's where it's still part of the systems of, you want to make sure that if I'm talking about collaboration, there's time for me and Danielle to actually collaborate. And so is there common planning time? Does my administrator recognize that prep time for me? And we all know that all of us are very busy in the schools. So making sure that it's carved out is going to make it happen there. And then the idea of ongoing coaching. So the idea of the supports that the general education teacher or the special education teacher may need. There's ongoing coaching or from a specialist there, and making sure that we have those systems to then support, right? Everybody wants to talk about the practices, right? And that's the fun stuff, right?
Yeah.
That's
what are we doing? Right. Yeah.
We really teach, the idea of how do we teach the students? How do we do this great co-teaching piece? And I think that's where I already kind of referenced the idea of really approaching it and spending a lot of time looking through the great resources around universal design for learning and really thinking about how do we present this lesson in a different way for students? How can they show it in a different way besides doing a dictation or a 3-paragraph essay? And of course, how do we engage them in a way that's meaningful for them? Because every year it's going to be different, and our classes are going to be different. Students are going to be different. So the way that I engaged last year is going to be very different. So getting to know my students, and that's a big practice there. And I think the other piece of really supporting self-determination and building that into what you're doing intentionally as well. So the idea of, I'm not sure if you've seen some of these pieces, but around choice boards where students can really select how they're going to address that Common Core standard, or how they're going to complete that lesson, or of course, how am I going to be reinforced for that lesson, and really giving them more ownership and choice and decision making there, and promoting self-determination there. But yeah, I think, of course, can't speak enough about the high leverage practices if you haven't seen through the Council for Exceptional Children, and using evidence-based practices there, and really obviously using great, got to use the F word, right? The function-based supports, right, for students, and really got to promote the way, and really thinking again of the learner. What are they getting out of their behaviors? How do I then prevent them from needing to engage in those challenging behaviors? How do I teach them another way? And of course, how do I meaningfully reinforce them? And so I think those are the big things for the practices. Getting to the data, or go ahead, Megan.
No, it's okay. I was just thinking as you're talking, all of these things that you're talking about are all things that we recommend for all students.
Exactly.
Definitely.
We talk about, when it comes to behavior, trying to consider, why is that student doing what they're doing? We talk about motivation. We have it as part of the referral form in SWPBIS for a reason, right? That we want to understand if behavior is a function of, is a way to communicate something. What are kids trying to say with their behavior? And so asking yourself why is something that we should ask for all kids. But then when you're talking about those additional supports, once you've asked yourself why, and you've kind of identified that function, you will aligning those additional supports with the function of that behavior makes so much sense to me. Right. And that, and that's good for anybody who needs additional support, whether the student has a disability or not. But then the other thing, what was the other thing you said? Oh no.
It was brilliant. I'm sure.
I lost it, but it was all really, it just, as you were talking, it just all kind of resonated for me. I was like, this is good. Oh, I know what it was.
Yay.
It was that, this idea of choice boards and, offering up a lesson in a new way, that you're not just, reciting something to people, or presenting something and then telling them to go and do it, or, just writing things down and telling students read it and then do it. That's also good for everybody. I'm thinking about some of the kids that I know, some of the younger kids and some of the older kids that I know, and how they talk about how they're bored sometimes in class. And that if you can offer up new ways of doing a lesson that leverage someone's strength or interest, I think it's good for everybody, right? That they would actually, everyone engages a little bit more deeply with a lesson if they can come at it from a way that's exciting to them. So this idea of choice, I think would be helpful for a lot of people.
Yeah. It's a powerful tool for behavior. It's a powerful tool for learning. And so I think, and it's cheap. Right.
Yeah. Anyway, those were
and it's engaging kids too, versus like, okay, well, here's what we're going to do. We're going to read this book, turn to page 50. It's giving them options. Do you want to read it on a book? Do you want to read it on the computer? Do you want to, you're giving them choices on how to access it, but they're still going to have 100%. The same material or content.
Yeah.
Love it.
Okay. Get to the data.
Yes. Data.
Because you know
favorite.
Us. You know us.
The other 4-letter word, right? Yeah. But I think a big piece is really thinking about using data to guide decisions. And again, a lot of times students with extensive support needs or disabilities are left out of that. And usually that's for the special education teacher to consider. And there's missed opportunities there, where if that schoolwide PBIS team could really look at what are some issues that we see as a school around inequities, around the way that we're teaching the expectations or those things. And so really using data, figuring out how to get data also strengths-based data, not just office discipline referrals, but how are our students with disabilities learning, and how can that contribute to then, again, how are we designing our expectations or reward systems there? And then, of course, the idea of everybody does the tiered fidelity inventory every year, and you got to interview the students.
Yeah.
But how often are we interviewing those students who maybe use an augmentative communication device or are receiving special education supports? And so being intentional again there, being intentional for finding those students that are on IEPs to ask them, what are the expectations, and have you received your reinforcement? And really getting to hear from them what's working and what's not working around PBIS.
Yeah. Let's elevate their voices. I'm here for it, Sheldon.
Honestly,
love that.
I had a question about specifically about referral data. Although I do hear you, I think that there ought to be, as I was looking into this topic a bit, it's difficult to find the places where schools are collecting data about inclusion. Every school, right, collects some sort of data around exclusion, right? The exclusionary practices, the discipline practices. And so that seems more readily available. My question, though, is this, to try and get a little bit more around, we've heard from people, I don't enter referrals about my students, who receive special education into our student information system or into SWPBIS. We don't enter referrals into there. We keep them somewhere else. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like, if you enter a referral for a student on an IEP or 504 or something, if you enter referrals into SWPBIS, let's say, for students receiving these kinds of supports, then you generate some reports around that. What kinds of decisions are you looking for? What kinds of questions as a team would you be asking of those data, and what kinds of decisions might you be looking to make as a result of it?
Yeah, well, I think it's giving you that opportunity to use evidence-based decision-making practices at that point. And the idea of using your great team-initiated problem-solving process and saying, if I now have 20 referrals for a student who has an IEP, I can identify a pattern of when and where these are happening, the what that is happening. I have an FBA in my hands right there. Right? I have data that can then guide me to then identify an effective tier 2 support for that student if he needs it. And so I think that's where you lose that opportunity. One, because even if I am the teacher and making those referrals, nobody else is seeing that. And there's a number of issues with that. But I think the big issue is I can't think outside of what I see. And so I lose the opportunity from getting some great ideas from Danielle or some other collaborators to say, Sheldon, don't you notice that it's every time you do this,
exactly,
you need to change your practice. So I think the idea of moving away from data being punitive and being that 4-letter word, and are we using it for decision making? And that might be a cultural shift as a school, because I don't want to be seen as the teacher that gives Johnny 20 referrals.
I think that's right.
But I also need that support. If Johnny's having 20 behavioral issues or behavioral occurrences, then I need to be able to support him. So
and that behavior is communication. So let's respond.
Well, we've talked about that a little bit too, that by collecting data, you then see what's going on. And when someone sees what's happening, you can see a trend. And when you see the trends, as a team, you feel compelled to do something about it. And sometimes you don't know what to do about it. And so I think this decision-making process is a helpful place to start to try and identify the problem with precision. And rather than coming at Sheldon and saying, my guy, you got to stop doing this thing to Billy over here, because you're the one referring him all the time when he does these things. You can come at it from a solutions perspective and saying, instead of saying, don't do this, it says, it looks like this is a point of contention between the two of you. Let's talk about how you can help Billy, and how we can help Billy then figure out a different move. You know?
And by having perhaps a special educator at the table, making those decisions, problem solving, looking at that data, they're going to offer some solutions or a point of view that maybe the team wouldn't have had otherwise.
That's right.
let's reteach the expectations, or let's teach, some of those even like foundational ones.
But, but collecting those data and entering them is where it all starts.
Yep.
And so, like you're saying though, that could be a shift, at a school that might not be a thing that people are interested in doing. But you can't just, I don't know. This has come up for me a lot lately. It's like, if you don't collect the data, you're just avoiding what could be, and both the problem and the solution to it. So it seems like, why not try and see what happens, Yeah. Anyway, that's my soapbox. I don't know. Maybe we figure out so we've talked a lot around this idea, about how we can expand our perspective on tier 1, that it's meant for everyone. Even our students that receive tier 2 and tier 3 supports. You've shared a few things on how we can make that happen, but why is it important? Why should we care about this, Sheldon?
I think if we're not intentionally including all students, we're intentionally at least accepting exclusion. And because knowing full well, if I'm not intentionally seeking out how to support students who may need that extra support, unfortunately, they're being excluded just by not really addressing that. I think, unless we consider students in the beginning for tier 1, and how do we include them at tier 1, then think about it. Whenever you've been haven't been considered and you've been unsuccessful for a while, now you don't even want to ask for help anymore, because you're like, this just doesn't work for me.
Right.
And so, but if we set up from the beginning and say, how do we support all students, and how do we support those students that are considered difficult to teach, and really design systems for them, we're making sure that we're not exacerbating the issues, and we're really preventing a number of things, and being more strengths-based rather than reactive there. So a long-winded way to say, why does inclusion matter? Why is it essential? It's because it's the most important thing.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
well said. I love that. How you hit that for us.
Danielle was, she had that aha moment a few days ago as we were exploring this topic together. And I think her words in the moment, she understands, you guys. She gets it. Okay. She gets it. But the thing that she said was, inclusion is just the opposite of exclusion.
Thanks, Megan. I know it's so obvious now. Well, it's funny. So
you say it, and it sounds obvious.
Right.
But then if you think about it, it's exactly what you said, Sheldon, that if we aren't pursuing inclusion, we're accepting exclusion.
Exactly.
And when you say it like that, it means something more, because accepting that someone in our building or someone in our learning environment does not feel like they are actually a part of what we have going on would be so awful to feel that.
Right.
If I was that student, if I was that teacher, that whole scenario would be terrible. And so, like you said, pursuing inclusion is the most important thing. It's the center of this whole time we've been talking about building relationships with students, with families, with our community. And if we're not actively pursuing that, then what are we doing?
And I think it's the idea of, what we have is so valuable. I mean, general education classrooms are so rich with language, with literacy, with kids, and the kids alone are the resources. And when you don't have access to that, you're missing out on that opportunity. And we are definitely excluding from, you've built great things. So why not, advertise those? Why not expand those so that more people can access it? Right.
Well, and again, like Rob Horner would say, let's, we've already created it. So make it as accessible, do it multiple times, like get it out there. Don't say, we have to do this next thing. Like, do what you already have in place and use those resources as much as we can before we have to add on more. I love that.
Totally.
Love it.
100%. You make it seem like something we can do, Sheldon. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us about this, using language that feels really accessible to all of us, and reminding us that there's already really good stuff that's happening in schools, and we just want to make that available to everyone.
I really appreciate that right now too. I feel like public schools and education is under attack a bit these days, and I'm a firm believer in the opportunities that we're creating for kiddos, and that's really what's needed and what's best for kids. So I appreciate you advocating for the kids that need it the most.
For the last 20 years.
Exactly.
Sheldon. Congratulations.
Yes. Well done. Well done.
All right. Well, thanks so much for being here. We appreciate you.
All right. Thanks for having me.